Opening week is finally upon us. That means the offseason is pretty much over. Last week, I gave the Giants a C+ for their offseason, but in one area, I would give them an A. In another area, a much lesser grade than that. So we'll recap the Giants offseason and kind of get you set for opening week next.
You are Locked On Giants, your daily San Francisco Giants podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to Locked On Giants, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Ben Kaspic, and on the show we provide daily episodes Monday through Friday talking about the San Francisco Giants in a way that's data-driven and rational, but also simple, passionate, and accessible to all. I'm a former contributor for the baseball statistics and analysis websites Beyond the Box Score and Rotographs. I've been podcasting about the Giants since 2015, and I'm a lifelong fan. Thanks for making Locked On Giants your first listen every day. We're free and available wherever you get podcasts. Today's episode is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline has you covered this season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before. BetOnline, where the game starts. And yeah, coming up on today's show, I want to recap the offseason. It's something we promised we would do all along when we got towards the end here. And barring any last-minute moves, which I wouldn't put past them, they're actually frequently active around this time, but I would say that the heavy lifting is probably over. There's always the possibility of an in-season trade like there was last year with Kris Bryant, but let's talk about who departed, who came in, and where do the Giants stand going into the 2022 season, which for them starts on Friday at home against the Marlins. So regarding kind of the changes to the San Francisco Giants, let's talk about the key additions first. Number one, the guy who kind of brought in the most money and is an outsider is Carlos Rodon. Rodon just had a dominant season with the White Sox, kind of got derailed a little bit by shoulder fatigue down the stretch, and his velocity dipped and there were concerns about an injury, but then he pitched in the American League Division Series and he was throwing 99. So I don't think the Giants are concerned about his health, and the thing is, if he's healthy, this is a guy who easily would have fetched $100 million plus on the open market. And so it's just the Giants kind of taking advantage of a situation where the pitcher was potentially really undervalued because teams are hesitant because of injury concern. But, you know, just like Kevin Gausman, when they signed him, it wasn't a marquee signing, but he was $100 million plus pitcher for the Giants, and we proved that he proved that by going out there on the open market and getting $100 million from the Blue Jays. So last year was a breakout year for Rodon under the tutelage of Ethan Katz, who was a Giants assistant pitching coach under Gabe Kapler, under that first coaching staff that got so ridiculed for being relatively inexperienced and young and large. By the way, they're getting plucked up left and right, and they've had tremendous success. But anyway, Ethan Katz was hired as the White Sox pitching coach, and last year was his first year, and under Ethan Katz, Rodon had this huge breakout, credited partially to a change in mechanics and able to kind of drive off his legs better. So the strikeout rate shot through the roof. This guy was one of the best strikeout pitchers in the game. He throws upper 90s. He's got a wipeout slider. He's got a changeup as well. Left-handed pitcher, pairs nicely at the top of the rotation with Logan Webb, who returns and had a breakout season himself. So I got to move on here, but I'm really happy about Rodon. If he's healthy, he probably goes out and has a really good season, and then he has an opt-out. It's a 2-year, $44 million deal, but he can opt out if he pitches 110 innings or more. And so if he has a great year, over 110 innings, he'll opt out, hit the open market, and probably sign with another team, not the Giants, because they don't really like long-term deals for pitchers for over $100 million. So that's kind of the reality of the situation. We'll talk about that strategy and how it can be not the most fun one for fans later on. But anyway, they also bring back Anthony DeSclafani and Alex Wood, and I think that these are really solid moves. DeSclafani for 3 years, $36 million. Alex Wood for 2 years, $25 million. Both of these pitchers pitched at their best for the Giants last season, and along with Webb and Rodon, it's a really strong 1 through 4, in my opinion, if they're able to stay healthy, which is always a question for any team. So those are nice signings, and they're multi-year deals, so they'll be here a while. There's no opt-out for them, so they're here for, the next few years. Alex Cobb comes in after having a really nice breakout type season. I mean, he's 34 years old. It's hard to call it a breakout, but he had a season that was kind of under the radar, really good for the Angels in 2021. Only pitched in 93 innings, 18 games, but a career high strikeout rate, career high velocity, and reportedly in spring training, he's been up to 97, kind of sitting 94 to 96, which is well above his career norm. And he went to Driveline, this facility in Washington State, and it's helped him. And so it's a big upgrade potentially for me over Johnny Cueto, who, by the way, is still out there on the free agent market for all those who kind of thought he was a valuable pitcher. He hasn't signed a single, even like a minor league deal or anything. He's still out there. So if these guys are healthy, for me, it's one of the better rotations in the game. And behind those 5, they brought in Matthew Boyd, who's had some really interesting seasons for the Tigers, and he's currently injured, but projected to be back around June and could be in that starting rotation mix if there's any kind of opening with an injury or whatever. There's always stuff that goes on. So I'm sure we'll see Boyd and that he'll pitch meaningful innings. But he was brought in on a major league deal, $5.2 million. Cobb, by the way, it's a 2-year, $20 million guarantee, but there's a club option for a 3rd year. So a lot of these guys, I mentioned Rodon can opt out and leave, but DeSclafani, Wood, and Cobb are all definitely going to be here next year. And for DeSclafani and Cobb, they may be here an additional year after that. So there is some continuity that's going to take place. And also part of the benefit of this is that their books kind of get cleared every year right now, and they're able to kind of re-explore the market and look for strong value. And I don't think they're opposed necessarily to big deals. It just hasn't happened. And that's exactly what Farhan Zaidi has said. But when your books are clear, you're able to explore those markets every year. It's possible that they've been hurt by low attendance the last, no attendance in 2020, and then average of half full attendance in 2021. And as that recovers, potentially, we'll see what it is this year. I think it could help with increasing the payroll, but we will talk about the payroll later on. But coming up next, I want to talk about the other key additions. There aren't many more, but then also the losses. Buster Posey to retirement, Kris Bryant. And did they do enough to make up for those losses? So we'll talk about that. We'll talk about the payroll and kind of the future outlook of this team as we get set here for opening week, Giants opening on Friday. So all of that coming up next. But first, betonline.net is your #1 source for all your sports betting needs and info. Find all the latest sports developments, including this week's Masters Championships odds, podcasts, and reviews for all the different leagues this season. They sent me an email with all the different Giants player props. So you've got over-unders on home run totals, RBI totals, wins for pitchers, strikeout for pitchers. There's a lot of good stuff in there, and we'll definitely get into it as the days go by leading up into the season here. BetOnline is your continued source for all your sporting wagering information, including live betting, esports, and scores. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends in action. BetOnline is where the game starts. All right, as promised, we are going to continue kind of recapping the San Francisco Giants offseason. We'll talk about the payroll a little bit later, how it was kind of flat from last year to this year, whether I think that's disappointing, where they rank in terms of payroll, and some common misperceptions about what teams' payrolls are. There's a lot of misinformation kind of floating around out there, and you've probably seen it yourself, and we'll talk about that as well. But Locked On MLB Prospects host Lindsey Crosby is a prospect encyclopedia, and he's going deep on the MLB stars of tomorrow. It's free and available wherever you get podcasts. Thanks again for making Locked On Giants your first listen every day. Make that show your second listen every day. So yeah, continuing to recap their offseason, the departures. I mean, well, let's see. Were there any more key additions? Yes, of course there was. Joc Pederson comes over on offense. So when I say offense, I mean, position player. They signed him to a 1-year, $6 million deal. He is just 29 years old. And so it's not like you're signing. He feels like he's been around forever, but he's still a young player, theoretically in his prime. The last couple of years have not been great for Joc Pederson, but he has recently had some really, really strong seasons. Basically from 2016 through 2019, he was just a consistent force in that Dodgers lineup and a well above average player, punished right-handed pitching, hit for a lot of power against right-handed pitching. In his career, just kind of a significantly above average offensive player, particularly against right-handed pitching. In fact, he's been significantly below average in his career against lefties. That has kind of been flip-flopped in the last couple of years, but I chalk that up more to a small sample than to any kind of meaningful difference. I say this 1,000 times, but platoon splits in a single season, we should just not even talk about because they don't mean anything. The sample is too small. You get random variations year to year. Even multiple years is probably too small of a sample to look at platoon splits. But anyway, historically, Peterson has crushed right-handed pitching, and that's what he's here to do. He's going to start in the outfield against righties and hopefully hit some homers. He has 4 seasons of 25 or more home runs, including one in which he hit 36. Actually, his second to last most recent season, full season, in 2019. He hit 36 home runs. And Dan Szymborski at Fangraphs, by the way, says that his projection system, ZiPS, would have pegged Joc Pederson for like a 4-year, $80 million deal if he had reached the free agent market after that year, as opposed to this year when you get him for 1 year, $6 million. So, it just goes to show you this year's 4-year, $80 million players, Kyle Schwarber, as an example, I'm pretty sure that's pretty much exactly what he got. In a couple years, may be a guy, if he was a free agent, who would have been in line for 1 year, $6 million if the next couple of years aren't super strong. So that's just how values can change. And you might wish they got Schwarber this offseason, but Peterson was like Schwarber just a couple years ago, and there's no reason that he should be significantly worse. It's not like, he got really old or something. He is still just 29 years old. So anyway, that's an addition. I think he'll fit in nicely and just do his job and have his role, which is pretty much the theme of this team. But that's pretty much all they did on the offensive side, counting major league signings and trades. Like, they didn't really bring anybody else in position player wise who figures to be like in that opening day roster. They did make a small trade for Luke Williams. He may make the opening day roster, but Kris Bryant was a free agent and he ends up signing with the Colorado Rockies. Buster Posey, they would have been able to bring him back with a club option, but he decided to retire. And so now the time is now for Joey Bart to get an opportunity to prove that he is a good major league player. And I think he definitely could be, but there are also some question marks, some real question marks. And we saw the kind of possible downside of a free swinging player like Bart in 2020. I'm not saying it's necessarily reflective of who he is, but I'm also not saying it's not. We don't really know, and he's going to have the opportunity to prove himself. And I think it's one of the most fascinating things to watch early if you're a Giants fan is how does Joey Bart perform? And it's going to be very influential on the future of this team. So that's definitely something to watch. But losing Posey, there's no doubt, is a huge blow to the San Francisco Giants. And Bryant, I just have to say, he didn't really make that much of an impact for the San Francisco Giants. And I think that the contract with Colorado is going to prove to be a little bit of an albatross. So good for him. He got paid. He kind of deserved it. He got his service time manipulated by the Cubs to start his career. So I like Kris Bryant. I'm happy for Kris Bryant. We're going to see a lot of Kris Bryant. It's a 7-year, $182 million deal, but there's no way the Giants were going to give that to Kris Bryant. And so on the offensive side, this is the question, like, did they do enough here? And I'm inclined to say, when I opened and said I gave them overall a C+ on the season, I give the starting rotation and the bullpen mostly returns. There's pretty much no losses in the bullpen. Donovan Solano also was a free agent and signed with the Reds. We thought all along he wasn't going to come back and that Thairo Estrada is going to take that role, and I think he can do perfectly fine in that role. And so I'm not really worried about that. Alex Dickerson also signs a 1-year, $1 million deal with the Braves. And of course, they bring back Brandon Belt and they bring back Brandon Crawford in a midseason extension. We don't get to like not count these things. A lot of people say I'm like manipulating the data by saying they spent this money. They didn't have to spend this money. They could have given rotation spots to Tyler Beede, Sammy Long, Sean Jelly. Plenty of teams do this. They don't spend money to bring back their good players. The Giants spent the money to bring back their good players. What's disappointing to me is that the payroll is flat from last year to this year. I would have hoped following up on 107 wins, it would have gone up. We'll talk about that in a minute, but I give the pitching side of their offseason an A. It's hard for me not to. I think it looks like a really strong rotation. There is injury concern, and the depth isn't like the best depth I've ever seen, but they have some depth. They bring in Jakob Junis. They bring in Carlos Martinez on a minor league deal. So they've got some guys behind their starting five, but if there's an injury at the top, it suddenly takes a pretty big hit. But I think that's true of pretty much any team. But on the position player side, this is where I was disappointed because there was so much elite talent out there this offseason in the form of Marcus Semien, Corey Seager. I'm just scrolling through. Carlos Correa, Freddie Freeman, who signs with the Dodgers, Trevor Story. Did I already say Corey Seager and Marcus Semien and Nick Castellanos, Seiya Suzuki, Starling Marte, Mark Canha? I mean, not all of these guys are premium. Kris Bryant, Kyle Schwarber, Chris Taylor. There were a lot of really good position players. Joc Pederson, I would have counted as a decent position player addition for whatever team picked him up. Michael Conforto, still a free agent, by the way. Apparently he injured his shoulder in like January, and that's what's holding things up. But anyway, Giants didn't make a splash really on the position player side, and I found that to be disappointing. But I think they're going to be okay. It still is just disappointing as a fan. You want to see them bring in someone to get excited about, and they didn't really do that. And even Rodon, like, it's hard to get too. He's probably going to be good, but like when it's a deal wherein like if he's good, he's going to leave. That's basically the deal because it's a 2-year deal with an opt-out after the first. And if he's good, he opts out and goes and gets a huge contract probably elsewhere. So I understand why that's disappointing. They didn't bring in somebody you can go like buy their jersey. I totally get that. So coming up next, we'll talk about the payroll situation and kind of the future financial situation of this team in terms of payroll, like how they're freed up for potentially future moves that could be those type of moves that fans are going to get excited about. So stay tuned for that conversation. But first, it's that time of year I've pretty much given up on all of my New Year's resolutions. I know that that's pretty common in April, but not this year. I'm sticking to my resolution to eat right thanks to Built Bar. It almost feels like it's not really a resolution because I actually enjoy eating them. Have you tried the Puffs? If you haven't, you are missing out on one of Built Bar's best tasting bars. Puffs are the first ever protein-infused marshmallow. They're fluffy, they're marshmallowy. They're not just a protein bar, they are a treat, and they're covered in 100% real chocolate as well. Go to Built.com, scroll down to their macros chart, and you'll be blown away. High protein, low calorie, high fiber, low carb. Most Built Bars contain 130 calories and just 4 grams of sugar, 4 net carbs, and 17 grams of protein. Go to Built.com, use promo code LOCKED15 and get 15% off your order. Use promo code LOCKED15 for 15% off at Built.com. All right, as promised, I want to wrap this up by looking at the payroll, talking about the inaccuracies that are getting spread around, and it really ticks me off. And if you followed me on Twitter, you've probably seen me talking about this. And I think you've definitely seen these major national reporters tweeting out this false information, specifically about the Oakland A's and their, quote, $33 million payroll, which is just not accurate whatsoever. So we'll talk about where the Giants rank and why a lot of people are citing the wrong figures here. But yeah, so I think that the Giants overall had a solid offseason, but this was an offseason with so much money coming off the books. I think a lot of us, myself included, thought that they'd, specifically on the position player side, that they would make a big addition, whether it was Seiya Suzuki or Marcus Semien or Chris Taylor, just somebody maybe to a multi-year deal. They didn't sign any position players to a multi-year deal. And it's disappointing, and we'll see, like, if the offense, the position players really struggle, I think then it'll be even more fair to criticize this. But if they go out there and perform well, it's hard to be too critical, right? Because when it comes down to it, it's all about winning games. But also, as a fan, it's more than that. It is about being emotionally connected to the players and enjoying the product that you're watching. But I don't know about you, but I quite enjoyed 107 wins, a lot more than what we were witnessing before Farhan Zaidi and company took over, when they had an aging roster that was not performing well and was expensive. That was a big problem. And so this is a much better situation to be in. And in future off seasons, they have the ability to like reset. So their payroll figures to be around $162 million right now. Ending last year, it was $162 million, as estimated by Roster Resource, which is on Fangraphs. So the beauty of Roster Resource, I'll just say it now, is that they count pre-arbitration player estimates. These other numbers that are getting thrown around by the likes of John Heyman and Bob Nightingale on Twitter and many others, when they say like the A's have a $33 million payroll, the Orioles have a $28 million payroll, they're not counting pre-arbitration estimates, which increase that number by 50% or more pretty much anytime they're saying that. So in reality, those numbers are closer to 50 million, which is still too low. I'm not defending the teams. I'm defending journalistic integrity, which I think that either if they know the real number and are citing a false one, that's really bad. But if they don't know it, it's their job to like investigate and see, oh, this is only counting 10 players. What about the other 16 minimum? Plus there's more guys who are going to come in due to injuries and expanded rosters and all that. So those numbers are wrong. And for the Giants, counting pre-arbitration estimates, they're at $162 million. And that includes $7.7 million estimated to pre-arbitration players in 2022. So where does that rank? Well, it ranks 13th in the league, but I must say, like $1 more million, and they'd be they'd be 12th. So they're like basically tied for 12th, which is coming off a 107 win season. I would have thought that they would probably be like 180 plus, but they're at 162. They tried to sign Trevor Story once they were already sitting at 162 like a week and a half ago. And so if you sign Trevor Story, that's undoubtedly 20 million plus per year. So they'd be at 180 plus. So I don't think that they are so concerned with what that number gets to. I think they're more concerned with making sure they're not locking themselves into a situation they don't want to lock themselves into, and targeting the players they want. And if they don't get them, they're not just going to spend for the sake of spending. So I get that, and I think that that's the right call. But at the same time, you've got the Dodgers at number one in the game, projected payroll at $286 million. So they're $124 million above the Giants. $124 million. That's more than the payroll of like 10 teams in the game ahead of where the Giants are spending. And, they go out and get a Freddie Freeman when they didn't even really need him. Although I must say, they lose Corey Seager and get Freddie Freeman. I'm not so sure that's not just a wash in terms of elite talent. But still, they're able to just sign and bring in elite talent. And the Giants could, in theory, as well. And I think that they've set themselves up nicely to make an addition. Like I said, they tried to sign Trevor Story. They could make a trade. Zaidi has talked about this, how they have the flexibility to take on payroll. They could take on a bad contract and buy a prospect. There are some teams out there right now, like the Padres, looking to shed some money any which way. There was a report that they were trying to attach Eric Hosmer and Chris Paddock to free up some money, and essentially you'd be buying Chris Paddock. But for the Giants, I don't think you would want to do all that just for Paddock, but they've got some good prospects that, you could take on some money and use your payroll that way. But it remains to be seen if they will. and we'll just have to wait and find out. But lastly, just looking ahead, for 2023 commitments, the Giants rank 13th. So they're right there again at the same kind of spot, only committing $92 million for next year. So they will have flexibility again to kind of reshape their roster next year. And I think that that's a good thing because it allows you to like pivot away from bad deals and continue to scour the market for players you like and good deals for you. So, some teams like the Mets already have almost $200 million committed for next year. And if your team struggles, if somebody's hurt, for example, and you're stuck with them, it can be a really bad position. And that's the one Zaidi inherited essentially in the 2018 offseason. So for 2024, this is the last thing I'll say. The Giants have only committed $14 million, which is like sixth lowest in the sport. And I made the point on Twitter, Shohei Ohtani is set to be a free agent that offseason at age 29. So I would just say, like, you start to look at who are the premium free agents every year. And if the Giants are able to kind of keep clean books every offseason, they'll be in the running. And for example, they were in the running for Bryce Harper, even when they had a bloated payroll. And they offered him $310 million. I get the question all the time, like, was it a legitimate pursuit? If you offer somebody $310 million and it's like on the table, how is that not a legitimate pursuit? That is crazy to me. We need to get rid of that narrative. It's just insane. Of course it was legitimate. And the Giants also have $0 on the books for 2025. So it's much better, in my opinion, to be in this position than to be stuck with like a big payroll that potentially underperforms. That is the worst position you can be in, and that's why the Giants had so many losing seasons there a few years ago. So anyway, that's all the time we have for today. I feel passionately about all this. I may have misstated where they rank in 2023 because I realized the ranking was still ranking 2022. So I think they're like 10th or 11th or 12th, something like that for 2023 commitments, just for the sake of accuracy. Anyway, thanks again for making Locked On Giants your first listen every day. Now make your second listen Locked On MLB. Paul Francis Sullivan, please call him Sully, brings you his unique perspective on the major leagues past and present. It's free and available wherever you get podcasts. Once again, my name is Ben Kaspick. Check me out on Twitter at Ben Kaspick, Kaspick. If you like this show, please consider rating it or leaving a review. It helps me out a lot. So thanks in advance, and thanks to everyone who's done so already. We've got a lot of great content continuing to come up later in the week. We've got a division preview with all the other Locked On NL West hosts coming up, I think, tomorrow. And we'll just get you set. We'll talk about the roster. There are still some battles going on and any other moves that happen between now and opening day on Friday. So thanks again for listening. Really hope you enjoyed today's show. Stay Locked On Giants.